Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Beyond the Application Cybersecurity Day, which we're hoping is going to help everyone understand that securing the modern SAP estate is about much more than just the roles and authorizations within the application itself. I'm Tom Venables. I'm the Practice Director for our application cybersecurity offerings at Turnkey. And I've been securing SAP systems for coming on for 20 years now. And the vast majority of that time has been spent designing roles and access management to ensure that the access to the application is fitting to the needs of the business and the processes that are operated, but also adhering to the principles of security, like minimum security and Chinese walls around data, etc. But that approach is far from the only thing we need to consider to secure a modern SAP system. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the increasing complexity of the landscape, the growing threats to our landscape, both internal and external, and the fact that there are disparate silos of security within the IT organizations, and the need to close those silos down a little bit, and talk about a common approach to securing those systems. And hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions and answers at the end of the session. So please do post those in the Q&A and in the chat, and somebody will try and get my attention, I'm sure. So thinking about the complexity, as we've undertaken the digital transformation journey, we've been leveraging newer technology and moving towards edge computing approach to architecture and applications. And that means we need to consider much more how the business critical information is being handled within those applications and within the architecture supporting them, as well as the threats that can impact the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of those systems and data. Even in a fairly simple SAP landscape enabled by the cloud and the HANA platform, such as we've got on screen here, you've still got your core, intelligent core as they're referring to it, enterprise applications with your ERP, your finance, your procurement, your logistics, HR and sales information, etc. But around the edge of that, you've got a number of cloud applications. We have to consider the databases on which that data is residing, and we have to consider who has access to the critical information assets. We're seeing more companies adopt cloud services. They're engaging more and more third parties and decentralizing their operations more than ever. That, coupled with a rise in using mobile-enabled or web-facing functionality, is presenting an ever-growing problem as we try to manage all the aspects of securing these critical environments. And just some of the things that we need to consider within the SAP estate are listed on screen there. As you can see, there's quite a lot that we've already got to consider before we even look beyond the SAP estate. Enabling an improved end user experience is now within the remit of security, as we ensure that single sign-on, passwordless security, multi-factor authentication, those kind of elements, which really do improve the user experience, the navigation within those elements. And then we have to ensure that the new technology can be leveraged to provide that seamless transition between devices. That's all eroding the network perimeter. It's no longer true to say that SAP is within the network and therefore doesn't need to worry about external threats, for example. And more services are being placed online and on the web, which again is making them more discoverable to attackers and allowing people to see your systems and potentially breach them, exfiltrate data or encrypt systems and hit you with malware or ransomware, or just exfiltrate the data, such as we've seen quite a lot recently, and misuse that. Coupled with those challenges presented by the erosion of the perimeter defense, there's a growing threat of malicious actors external to the organization. Most, if not all of you, will have seen the rise in news stories covering ransomware or malware attacks on organizations. There's been several recently, or just talking about the sheer profits that these threat actors are accruing. The outdated image of the hacker as a hoodie wearing malcontent is no longer accurate. The groups which are targeting organizations now are well organized, well funded, and very professional in how they target and exploit companies. They do their research, they penetrate the networks, they're resident for a while. And as you can see, malware and cyber attacks are on the increase. The top graphic here is just the number of attacks of incidents with over $1 million. This is statistics from the FBI. and the number of malware that's just generally floating around. Anyone who's undertaken a MITRE ATT&CK framework assessment will know that you can be generally or specifically protected against malware. And this is just the malware that is floating around on the internet looking for systems to infect. That's without a specific targeted attack. And as you can see with the top 15 cyber threats, malware and web-based attacks are number 1 and 2, phishing and web app at 3 and 4, and spam being one of those mechanisms for delivering both malware and phishing attacks. And things like DDoS, which used to be very high up our list of priorities, are starting to move down the list a little bit. Data breaches, jacking, espionage, ransomware, these are all on the rise. And securing these threats is about much more than the traditional approach to security, much more than roles and authorizations and GRC and segregation of duties checks. They still remain very important, but far more we need to consider integrating the management of cyber risks which can impact operations. Our networks are more permeable than ever, with applications moving towards these web-facing endpoints, or architecture leveraged entirely on cloud assets. The ability to move business data outside of our control has increased exponentially, and certainly in the last year and a half, we've seen a massive change to ways of working, which has presented an increased risk to our systems and data. As I've moved from a very SAP-centric view of securing applications towards a much broader information risk management portfolio, one of the key things I've seen is that there's something of a disconnect between the world of the wider information security, sort of the CISO-owned parts of the organization, and the business applications themselves. There's different priorities and even different language being used. So on the left here, we've got some of the elements of securing SAP that we're all familiar with. But when you start to talk about the wider threat landscape and closing the silos between the SAP environments and the IT, you can see that SAP becomes just one small component of what we have to secure. And there's a number of elements of securing that. SAP security specialists, we tend to understand the business processes used within the application and how to secure those elements, but we're less conversant in concepts like endpoint detection, event monitoring, network telemetry, or the problem of malware. Conversely, the CISO and their organization often view SAP as a little bit of a black box, which has historically been difficult to integrate with wider security initiatives, such as enterprise-level identity and access management, extended detection solutions, or autonomous response solutions, such as are operated by the SOC. As you can see, the CISO typically has that huge landscape to secure, but we share many of the same challenges across that whole landscape, and some of these almost all of these are applicable to the SAP landscape as well. We've got to ensure that we have good quality access control across the whole estate. We have to make sure that we have visibility of and responses to any security incidents that occur, that we're protected against malware attacks, whether their focus is on ransoming data back to us or other types of malicious infection. I mean, attackers now are able to remain resident in penetrated systems for several months in some cases without being detected. We have to know and manage our vulnerabilities, which is about much more than just patching. There's code quality, other easily exploitable techniques such as 0 days. It's a key element in our defense. We have to understand the network and the security that's applied to that and the communication protocols that are used. Firewalls to cloud applications have been one of the key challenges of adopting this digital transformation journey. Knowing your data flows and the assets involved in critical data ensures that you can apply your security efforts appropriately. Understand when data has been exfiltrated and where it may be directed is one area where the CISO has much better visibility than traditionally the SAP security operations tend to. Threat intelligence is one area where we can learn from the cybersecurity professionals as they're understanding who might be attacking us, the techniques they use. And that's key to ensuring that we're protected against those specific threats, again, helping us to focus our spend and our effort where it can do the most good. Patch and configuration management are key elements in securing against the vulnerabilities, protecting your estate against common exploits, 0 days, and the ever-present threat of exploits that are just published online, either on the dark web or on easily accessible resources like GitHub. Ensuring that all users understand the threats and how to defend against them is a key component in securing your entire estate. And you need to consider if your SAP users, with the keys to your financial kingdom, as it were, are they receiving the same level of training as people who aren't interfacing with critical systems? And is that enough for you? Do you need to train those people up? Do they need to understand better how to spot a malware attack or a phishing email or a compromise? And then you've got your governance, risk, and compliance, which needs to oversee all of that. If you don't understand the risks to your organization, whether those are downtime for manufacturing or loss of financial systems, at the time that you've got to report your shareholder statements, etc., what is the impact to your business? And are you managing that risk effectively? And enterprise level GRC solutions can help you to understand that. That will also help you to target your spend, your effort, and your internal team's time to where it can do the most good to achieve true security and not just a compliance angle of security. With all of those initiatives to manage across a complex landscape, it's very, very easy to see why sometimes there can be a bit of a gap between the SAP-centric view of the world and that of the CISO. So how do we ensure that we're sharing some commonality of approach? Well, one way that we can work to integrate is by sharing some common language. And a common framework to address the shared risks that we face across business operations and IT operations. One of the ways that I've used over the past few years to really sort of structure my thinking around that is the NIST cybersecurity framework. It's not just a cybersecurity framework, it's a defensive framework. And it applies just as clearly to SAP systems as it does to any other IT networks or systems. It's straightforward, it's easily understandable, and it works broadly as a way in which we can increase maturity of our security across the board. First up, we've got identify, which is about identifying the processes, the assets, the data, and the risks to those across our estate. Once we've done that, we know what we've got to secure, so we can move on to protect, where we're securing against those identified risks on the critical assets and data that they're applicable to. That's where most of our controls effort is focused, and where I've certainly spent most of the last 20 years is on protecting systems against risk, but not necessarily with that view of that top-down view of risk. Sometimes we're implementing controls without understanding exactly what the business risk is or the IT risk. So by identifying and protecting, we're much more focused. Then we move into detect, understanding when protections may fail and putting in place mechanisms and solutions to identify the occurrence of a cybersecurity or a breach incident within the systems. Now, applied to an SAP system, that would be to detect when a control failure may have occurred. Somebody's entered and approved their own invoice as a classic GRC example. Being able to detect that allows you to then respond to those incidents and contain the severity and the impact of it. So by moving down this, we're increasing our maturity all the way. By having that timely response, we can also ensure that we've got recovery plans in place. So if the respond fails, can we quickly get back up and running? Can we minimize business downtime to business operations? By sharing that framework approach between the application owners and the InfoSec organizations, we can better coordinate our response to threats. We can integrate solutions, technical or process-based. We always talk about people, processes, and technology. And we can gain critical insights into the system health and defensive posture and better respond to the emerging threats to our landscape. The truth of the matter is that closing the gap between InfoSec operations and business operations is better for everyone. The business owners of risk can gain insight into the security initiatives protecting their critical data. The CISOs can bring important applications like SAP into the fold for improved protection for the organization as a whole. We have to start seeing cybersecurity as something which impacts everyone, and so is everyone's responsibility. Securing against the threats is key to securing the business. And that's why we've put today's schedule of sessions together. I hope everybody finds the day informative, enjoyable, and want to thank everyone for joining us as we take security beyond the application through today's sessions. That's it from me. I'll take a few questions now, if you just give me one moment to read them. So a question here, can any one solution cover all of the NIST pillars? That's quite an interesting and expansive question. There are solutions that certainly help you to identify risk and protect against them, and that do include elements of detect and respond. I'm thinking of this single pane of glass that I referred to a moment ago. Something like ServiceNow has a number of elements within it. They have a discovery and configuration management database element that allows you to identify key assets and data flows associated to applications. So keeping the focus on SAP, it can detect all of the servers involved in the provision of an SAP system, whether it's a web application server or a database behind that. It can then help you to protect that by identifying configuration management or patch issues within that. So you can apply those. There are also IT workflow elements to the ServiceNow platform that allow you to put in place processes and autonomous protections when systems fall out of alignment. So you've got things like IT asset management, IT operations management working together. And some of those workflow solutions are really effective at putting in place the correct processes. There's also detect elements integrating with something like IT service management, where you can integrate something like an extended detection and response solution, say a Darktrace or a Fortinet, those kind of elements. And those can have an automated feed into ServiceNow to raise incidents and take advantage of those workflows so that those get the investigation and the follow-up and the response plans that you need. So there are solutions that can tick all of those boxes, but there's not really one silver bullet or that is going to ensure that you move to 100% maturity across the board. There are some very dedicated solutions that are very, very good within these pillars. And the single pane of glass is a good way to pull those together. And I think in one of the lunch and learn sessions, you'll see how you can pull that into ServiceNow to understand how you're doing against those NIST pillars. Another question here, as an SAP architect, how would you raise security across SAP to the CISO level so they understand? That's another good question. I think one of the key elements is to have the conversation first. CISOs tend not to speak SAP unless they've come from an SAP background. And a lot of the time we treat ourselves as a little bit of a special case and say, yes, but that can't apply to us. We can't implement single sign-on because not all of our systems can handle it. We can't enforce password parameters because some of our systems are too old to accept a 16-character password. Those sorts of elements often alienate SAP from the CISO. And I think what we need to realize more and more is that we have a shared objective and a shared threat. So the first thing I would do is talk about the integration elements that the CISO is looking for. What are their key priorities in securing the organization? Are they concerned about malware encryption on databases that are serving critical business applications? Are they concerned about their operational technology, which probably won't apply that closely to SAP, but there is a very strong hook in from things like manufacturing OT networks that have to do just-in-time procurement processes and logistics processes within the SAP system. So if they're not fed with the right components at the right time, everything grinds to a halt. And so you can pull together those shared challenges and understand where you can share solutions to them. You're also very well hooked into the business operations in a way that the CISO would love to be. You know, SAP application owners are often, a finance director, part of that organization. So you understand the business operations, you've got a good understanding of business risk, and you've usually got some of the funding that the CISO is looking for to be able to secure the organization. And by pulling SAP into that integrated approach, there's a very good opportunity for you to work together to target where you're weak in these NIST pillars against specific applications or network components that present a risk to you both. So I would try and use the CISO's language as much as possible, but the common terminology across both is always risk. That's what we're trying to manage. And understanding that the CISO is working to protect your applications and that it's not just an IT problem in inverted commas is one of those ways you can close that gap. I hope that answers the question, but please do feel free if you need any other clarification. Question on whether the slides will be made available. Yep, we'll be putting all of the sessions available on the platform, so you'll be able to download and take a look at your will. I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment. Excuse me a second whilst I just scroll through. Okay, I'll give it one more minute just to see if anything else comes through. But I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Oh, there's a good question just come in there. Can ETD integrate with SIEM? Yes, it can. Most SIEM solutions will take either alert feeds or SecLog type feeds. One of the problems historically of integrating SAP solutions with SIEM solutions is the volume of data that SAP can and does export. There's a significant amount of logs. There's about 37 logs that you can export across the SecLog, the dbtab log, the audit log, etc. What ETD will allow you to do is pre-filter those feeds before you integrate with a security incident and event monitoring system, for anyone who's not familiar with SIEM. And that pre-filtering allows you to only export the alerts that you care about. And I would encourage everybody to try and integrate SAP via a mechanism like ETD with SIEM, because an effective SIEM is all about data enrichment from multiple sources. Your network perimeter, big cybersecurity teams can detect thousands of attempts to breach the perimeter per minute on large organizations, and certainly government organizations, those kind of things. But they don't necessarily know where within the network that attacker might be trying to get to. So something like endpoint detection or extended detection and response solutions allow them to say, okay, this person is targeting this server. But they may not know what that server does. All they see is an IP address or a server configuration thing, and they've not necessarily got it mapped to the business criticality of that architecture. If you then put your SAP system logs in there, you can then see that that network breach and that server breach correspond with an attempt to commit fraud or to exfiltrate data from the SAP system. And so you can really enrich your pattern analysis within your incident and event monitoring solutions to build together a great detection and response plan, and continue to improve your security. It's one of the things that security operations centers or SOCs work pretty hard on is triaging and investigating those incidents. And the more data that you can provide to that CISO level SIEM, the better enriched that data is and the more insightful your response plans will be. And another good question here, a robust security solution through the integration of a number of tools is expensive. What are the fundamentals of the business case to justify the spend? What buzzwords grab the CISO and CFO attention? That's another good one. Yes, you're absolutely right. The tooling to fully integrate all of the defensive things that we'd like to spend our money on is very expensive, but it's also very necessary. The business case to justify the spend is what is the business risk? Any risk equation, whenever we're assessing risk, we have to balance cost against benefit. If the cost of a day's downtime on your SAP system is less than the cost of an hour's downtime on your manufacturing systems, for example, when you present that case to the CISO or the CFO and say, we could lose SAP for a day if this database is encrypted by a ransomware attack, and the CISO has the operational technology challenge of well, if this particular SCADA controller for our operational technology goes down for 10 minutes, we lose 10 times the cash value ultimately. Then obviously the higher priority threat is going to probably win in that battle for funding. But the challenge to the CISO, the CFO, and actually above them, really it's the board that you're trying to convince in most organizations, because they're the ones who unlock the funding for the CISO to achieve their objectives, is to articulate the risk in true business terms. Cybersecurity risks are appearing in most board level reports that you can see within Companies House. Most shareholder statements are talking about risk reduction. And certainly a lot of executive committees, with the increased media attention on things like ransomware, are starting to have much more focus on the cybersecurity threat. Making sure that you can highlight where you're weak, where you're strong, and where those weaknesses are going to impact business operations, and therefore the bottom line of the organization, is going to be key to securing the funding and the attention that you need. The buzzwords at the moment are ransomware. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody who's keeping one eye on the media. It's not even the cybersecurity journals that are picking this up. This is all over CNN and Reuters and major media outlets. And whilst I'm not a fan of the latest buzzword being a thing, if it can help you get the attention that you need, then by all means understand what the board's focus is and couch your need in terms that they'll understand, which is usually financial. Not always, but yeah, it can be. I don't think there are any other questions. I'd like to thank everybody for listening. I hope you find value throughout the day. If anybody's got any questions or follow-ups that I didn't fully address within this session, then please do feel free to send them through and we'll do our best to respond. Thank you for listening, and please enjoy today's sessions.